morning, everybody. I'm Diana Howard, Chair of the Virginia Beach Tea Party, but I'll be moderating today since the moderator isn't here for the Tidewater Liberty Partners. We'll start with an invocation by Kenny Golden, after which we will do the Pledge of Allegiance, if I can invite Kenny up to the podium.
Ma'am. Well, good morning. Please join me in prayer, if you will. In this season that is the season of peace, there is no peace here on our planet. In Israel, the fighting goes on, and innocents are killed, and we hope that that war will come to a closure soon, and that people will be restored to their homes, and that Israel will be safe. We also ask that there's peace in Ukraine for those poor people who stand up against a foe that is tremendous in strength, with an economy that's amazing, and they're putting all of that into fighting the poor Ukrainian country that's decimated. Please help those people, Father, as they go through this terrible season, and remind them that December and Christmas and the birth of Christ is a season of hope. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Would you please join us on the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. You may be seated. Okay, everybody probably knows this already. Our contract with TFC is set to expire in June of 2024.
Who's TFC?
Oh, Tidewater. Tidewater Fiber.
That's right.
I guess corporation. Just used to acronyms, whatever. Anyway, so we have the owner of TFC here with us today to talk about it. Recyclable is still a viable option. What is it going to cost us when the contract ends in 2024? And the city had a survey. Hopefully you all took it to decide which of those options that you wanted to take, whether you wanted to increase your monthly bill for recycling, or go back to having the drop-off sites the way we used to have it. Or I think, what was the third option? You would opt in, and then they would try and decide what the cost was going to be by how many people opt in. So I'd like to now bring up our guest speaker, Mike Benedetto. We used to work with
Thank you, Diana. It's great to be here. Great to see you, Robert Dean, and some of the other folks, Mr. Moss and others. Really appreciate the opportunity to come up here. And let me start by giving you a little bit of background and history on recycling, because recycling has been around for a long time. Actually, my great-grandfather came over from Italy in 1897 through Ellis Island into New York, settled there in Brooklyn, and was actually collecting trash that other people were throwing out. And back in those days, he was able to make a living on it. And it grew from that in New York City back in 1897 to where we are today, which is incredible, the amount of material that we're able to capture and make a dollar on. And it's always been said, one man's trash is another man's treasure, and that is certainly true in my family, with my great-grandfather starting the recycling business. The TFC was started by my dad in 1973 here in Chesapeake, and we were coming down in the 1950s. My father was coming down to the Virginia Beach area with some of the folks actually from Long Island that were in the building business, the Aragonas, the Sicilios. They were building houses down here, and he really liked the area. But it wasn't until 1973, when he left his family business, that he came down to Virginia Beach and opened up an operation in Chesapeake. And back then in the 1970s and 80s, if you wanted material, you paid for it. So people would load up their cars with cardboard or newspaper, and they would bring it to our center. We would weigh the vehicles, they would take out the material, and then we would recycle it, and mostly paper items. Aluminum cans are also recycled too, but it's mostly cardboard and newspaper that was getting recycled back in the day. We had drop-off locations for Boy Scouts, for Lions clubs, where we'd have a container in a parking lot, and that worked out fairly well, but drop-off is really not that convenient. And it wasn't until the 1980s when curbside recycling started. And one of the reasons it started was there was a barge that left New York called the Mobro, M-O-B-R-O barge, that was loaded with trash.
Yeah.
And this barge was looking for a home, and it was leaving New York and supposed to come to Virginia. And word got out that the barge might have some trash, whether it was true or not, that we may not want in Virginia, whether it be medical waste or maybe even Jimmy Hoffa's body, for all I know. But there was rumors, and they didn't take it in Virginia. So this barge of trash wound up going to other ports in other states and even other countries before it finally got turned down and went back to New York City, and that trash was unloaded. And there was a perceived landfill crisis. And by that I mean there were a lot of landfills and a lot of trash was being disposed of in this big hole in the ground, but a lot of these landfills were not lined. So when you had the decomposition of all this trash, it was actually getting into groundwater. And those of us in the crowd that are from New York might remember the Fresh Kills landfill in Staten Island that is unlined, and the theory back in the day was this trash would decompose, the tide would come in, it would take the stuff that decomposed back out to sea, and that's how material was disposed of back in the day. And the landfill now is closed, and new environmental standards are making it such that you have to line landfills. When it rains, all of that water that hits all of that decomposing trash is called leachate, which can be very contaminated. We want to keep that out of our drinking water, and so that gets treated also. But the whole landfill crisis is what started curbside recycling here in Virginia and throughout the United States. And the Southeastern Public Service Authority, back in the late 1980s, started a little pilot program with some little 18-gallon bins, and they said, please recycle. And the program was so well received back in the day that it expanded from a couple thousand households to every city in Hampton Roads had these little small bins. And people were putting paper bottles and cans in the bins. And it wasn't very efficient at all. The bins were small, the material would blow, it would get wet, you didn't have a lot of room. These bins were so small, a couple of milk jugs or a couple of newspapers, and that thing was full. And then a driver had to get out of the truck, lift up the bin, and then sort it into one of 6 different compartments. And whenever any one of those 6 compartments filled up, the truck had to leave the route, go back and dump, and then go back on the route to collect. And then it transitioned from those trucks with 6 compartments to trucks with 2 compartments, paper separate from bottles and cans. And so that provided a better and more efficient service, but we were still using the little small bins, and the driver still had to separate out the paper from the non-paper items. And then Virginia Beach was the first in the United States and probably worldwide to do what it did back in 1996 when Mayor Obendorf and the rest of the city council, I think maybe even Robert Dean was on back then, they said, we need a better program. And there was a gentleman in Public Works by the name of Wade Kyle, and Wade said, I want a better program. This is not working very well. And what they did was they said, we're going to talk to the industry, and they talked to folks like us and others, and they said, we're picking up trash in these big carts. Can we pick up recycling in these big carts? And there were doubters out there that you could throw this all into the same cart and actually recycle it. But in 1996, we actually put in a system and worked in partnership with Virginia Beach to have the first program of its type in the United States, right here in Virginia Beach, 27 years ago. Really incredible on how that transitioned. And one of the things, just on a little side note that I'd like to share, is we as residents of Virginia Beach are paying $27.50 a month for our waste and recycling collections. Of that, less than $3 comes to TFC, $2.93. So $24.50 goes to the trash side, less than $3 comes from the recycling side. On a side note, back in 1996, 27 years ago, we were charging more money than we are today. And the reason being was that value of material in that bin was so great that it subsidized the overall cost. And that went away back in 2018 when China kind of pulled out of the market and they instituted some bans on some material because some of the stuff that was going into the country was so dirty and so contaminated, it was creating environmental issues for them, that they said unless it's pure, unless it's clean, we really don't want it coming into our country. So they had inspectors at the port opening up containers of recyclable goods, and if it was not pure, they were not allowing it into the country and sending it back. So it created a little bit of a challenge. Speaking of which, I'd love to share with you all what is recyclable and what is not, because that is one of the biggest challenges we have. As a company, we would love to take everything. However, some material is less valuable than other material. That's why we don't recycle everything. And there is a cost with recycling, and it does cost more to recycle, to do the right thing, than it does to just throw it in a big hole in the ground, where the cost is not necessarily recognized today, but it's recognized over a period of time when you have what I like to refer to as a pool or a mountain of trash like Mount Trashmore, which was closed about 50 years ago. And nowadays, every year our region generates enough trash to build a Mount Trashmore every year. And it's a never-ending cost. So they're monitoring the methane that's generated from the decomposition of the waste. There's water that's around there that they have to make sure is handled properly. The grass that's on top of Mount Trashmore has had to have been replaced, which is one of the reasons why they don't want you sledding there and tearing it up to get down to the stuff that's buried underneath. So there are challenges with landfills, and that's the worst way to handle trash, is to just take something that was created and throw it into a hole of ground and see how long it takes to actually decompose. Recycling is actually the best way to handle trash. Our program takes paper bottles and cans as a generalization. By paper, I mean pretty much anything that can tear. We are very sensitive to it being not contaminated. So you might hear pizza boxes. Do we want pizza boxes? The simple answer is no. When in doubt, throw it out. But if it happened to be a clean pizza box and you ripped the top off and there wasn't any cardboard on it, there wasn't any pizza grease or crust or plastic or anything like that, if it's good clean paper, we want it clean and dry, and it can be recycled. So most paper items, anything you can tear, is an acceptable item. When it comes to bottles, pretty much any plastic bottle or glass bottle you can throw into the recycling container. If you can pour it down the drain, it's okay. Motor oil you can't pour down the drain. Some of these other products you can't pour down the drain. That stuff creates a problem. Not for us, the folks that we sell to. Because when we sell them the plastics, they will actually grind it and they'll use water to clean it. And as they use the water to clean it, that water needs to be disposed of in the normal methods that we dispose of stuff down the sink. So they don't want oil in there, they don't want antifreeze in there, they don't want other chemicals in there, then create a hazardous product. So they ask us to please only collect bottles that are able to be dumped down the drain. When it comes to cans, think of soup cans, aluminum cans, beverage containers. Things like that are what we're looking for. What does that exclude? Scrap. We don't want scrap. We don't want window panes. We don't want motors. We don't want nuts, bolts, things like that. Our system is not designed to handle it. Some other cans that we really don't want are paint cans. If they have paint in there, the paint is a problem. We have had people recycle paint cans. We dump it into our truck, and the paint goes onto the road and creates an environmental issue. So that is a challenge for us, as well as pressurized containers. So aerosol cans, propane tanks, things like that are items we don't want. But paper bottles and cans are the simple thing that we share with folks that we're looking for from an acceptability perspective. What does that also exclude? Electronic waste. Lithium-ion batteries are one of the worst things that we get into our recycling stream. When we compact it, we've had truck fires, and we're often running compressed natural gas vehicles. And a fire in a compressed natural vehicle is a challenge. These trucks cost about $400,000 a piece. We are semi-self-insured, so it's coming right out of our pocket. And if people put the wrong items in, anything that you plug in, anything that's got a battery in there, it creates a challenge for us and a potential fire hazard. Just to let everybody know, we have had fires in our compressed natural gas vehicles, but the trucks are safe. What happens is these tanks that we have that have compressed natural gas in them actually have a little plastic valve in those tanks individually, and if there is heat, that valve releases. And the best example I can use might be an aerosol can, where if you push it down, so you might hear that popping of that little plastic valve, and then you might actually see a flame coming from that, almost like a flamethrower, or taking an aerosol can with a match. But they're vented north, so if the truck catches on fire, the fire should shoot straight up in the air, and that valve should release, so the trucks are safe. It's a cleaner burning fuel. We actually buy it right from Virginia Natural Gas. It comes in an underground line into a big tank that gets pressurized, and then we fill our vehicles with that. So instead of using diesel fuel, which is not as clean burning, we're using compressed natural gas in a number of our vehicles. We'll talk briefly about the China ban, and what happened was China had some challenges, and still does, I'm sure, from an environmental perspective, with pollution. They had different acronyms for it. Blue Sky was one of their initiatives, that they wanted to be able to see the sky. You had the Olympics coming, and they wanted the countries to come and see what a great country they were, and so they stopped the importation of a lot of this material, as I mentioned earlier, and that really created a problem where the pricing and our trade partner being China went away, and so we're no longer able to ship there. And to share the impact of that, there was about 25 to 30 million tons a year of paper going from the United States to China. The next biggest country importing waste paper was India at about 2 million tons a year. So when China said no more, we went from getting paid for our cardboard mixed paper to actually having to pay to get rid of it, to get somebody to take it. It is a commodity. It is challenging. It is something that we continue to recycle, and the rest of the world had to, and the United States had to adapt to China pulling out of the market, which we've done. So that was a real challenge, and that was one of the biggest challenges we had from a financial perspective, was the value of that material went down overnight, literally in the beginning of 2018. Another challenge that we had that you may all be familiar with is COVID. So COVID happened right after China pulling out of the market in 2018, and what did that mean? That meant that people are staying at home. People are staying at home. How are they shopping? Online. What are they doing? They're getting in boxes. Where do these boxes, these products go? Into the recycling bins. Oh gosh, we have a 25% increase in volume with everybody staying at home. We don't have enough trucks. Let's go buy more trucks and drivers. Well, we can't get trucks. Why? Well, because the factories are shut down. Oh my God, well, we can't hire drivers because everyone is staying home, and we're challenged with getting trucks, and it created some real issues with us from a service perspective that we're still dealing with today. We've had trucks that have been down for almost half a year, 150, 175 days. Why? Because we're waiting for a part. We were speaking earlier about how some of these parts on some of these older vehicles are really challenging to get, and they're just not making it anymore. So some of the trucks that we have been sitting for an extended period of time, including new vehicles that are challenged, because the folks that we buy them from are challenged to get the labor in to actually fix the trucks. So it has created a challenge for us, and our costs have increased, and that is part of the conversation that we're having. So the trash that is actually being generated right now in the cities, you have 2 carts in Virginia Beach and most cities for recycling and for trash. The trash right now is going to Portsmouth, to the waste-to-energy facility, through a transfer station that's in the city. So Virginia Beach, for example, there are 2 transfer stations. Trash gets collected from your house, brought to the transfer station, unloaded from the small truck, put into a bigger truck, brought on over to Portsmouth. In Portsmouth at the waste-to-energy plant, what they do is they take this trash and they turn it into steam. And the steam is sold to the Norfolk Naval Shipyard, where they use it for energy. And then there is some resulting ash that is generated from this process that goes over to the landfill in Suffolk, and it's used as what's called alternative daily cover. So when trash gets dumped in a landfill, they need to cover it with some product. Dirt, shredded tires, ash, sometimes even glass. but they have a cover that is required to be put on that trash at the end of every day for safety and for environmental reasons. And so that ash is actually getting recycled right now. But the waste-to-energy plant, the contract did not get renewed. So come July 1st of next year, what's going to happen to the trash? And right now it seems like it's either going to be dumped into a landfill in Suffolk or perhaps Hampton or some other landfill somewhere else, because the waste-to-energy plant closing down then creates a challenge on what are we going to do with the trash, and there is not another one nearby that could be a viable option. So it becomes a challenge, and all the more reason to try and do the right thing from an environmental perspective. I like to often say and quote, I think it was Benjamin Franklin that said, or maybe it was Thomas Jefferson, I should say, that said, we don't own the earth. We're merely the caretakers for that next generation. And what we're doing today is going to be impacting our children and that next generation. And I really think that our generation, my generation, has created some challenges for that next generation with clean air, with clean water, with natural resources being available. And so every little bit that we can do to make a difference is important. And I really would love to see more incentives. I'd love to see more emphasis on, we get a trash can, and we all pay the same rate every month. Whether you have one trash can with a little bit of trash, or two trash cans, or 3 or 4 or 5 with a lot of trash in there, we're all paying the same rate. Unlike other utilities we have, you pay for usage. The more power you use, the more water you use, the more gas you use, the more you pay. But there is no incentive right now to actually reduce your trash. Everyone pays the same rate. And if you do a great job recycling, yes, you are saving the city money. So yes, we should be recycling more and trying to capture as much as we can out of that waste stream and putting it into the recycling stream, because it is saving the city money. City pays for their trucks, their drivers to collect trash. That trash then gets paid to get disposed of into a disposal system, whether it be waste to energy or a landfill, and that just creates a burden down the road that is difficult to quantify from a cost perspective. So the City of Virginia Beach put out a survey that just ended a couple weeks ago, the 17th of November, I believe, and they were asking residents what they want to see happen with their recycling program. And we had done a similar survey in other cities, including Norfolk and in Chesapeake, and there was an overwhelming support for recycling. As I mentioned, right now it's less than $3 a house. That number is going to go up. Pricing in the region might be somewhere in the $6 to $7 per household range per month for a truck to come by your house 26 times a year, 2 times roughly a month to collect material. And when I look at it from my perspective, and I know that I'm a recycler, I'm a 4th generation recycler, but to me it's something that's economical, something that folks want, something that children want. We've been telling them how important it is to recycle and keep material out of the waste stream so we have the natural resources for manufacturing. And it is so much better when you think about an aluminum can and taking one right that was created and recycling it back into aluminum can versus thinking about what you would have to do to mine the ore and then take it from that stage into a viable product where you can make aluminum cans. The amount of energy that's used, the amount of pollution that's used to create something from virgin is so much more expensive. Same thing with paper and trees. Cutting down a tree, taking this big tree and chopping it up into wood chips and then cooking these wood chips and adding chemicals to try and get this fiber out of this wood versus taking a cardboard box and just basically shredding it and turning it back into pulp. It's so much better, so much more economical, better for the environment. So with the survey ending, the city did put out a request for proposals, which is out on the street now, and in the next probably 60 to 120 days, the city will make a decision on one of 3 options. One is to continue the program as it is with the carts at your house with an anticipated increase in costs of a couple dollars per month. Option 2 would be a drop-off center where you would be asked to store your recyclables, load them into your car, bring them to a centrally located location, unload it from there, and then transport it. Another option that was under consideration in the survey was an opt-in, opt-out, where if you like recycling, you can pay for it. If you don't, you do not have to. And while that option sounds appealing for those folks that want to recycle, we have seen it failed in other areas because it's very difficult for a contractor to spend $80 to $100 for a recycling cart with a resident under a contract on a month-to-month basis that can either opt in, opt out at any time, and then you're sending a truck through a neighborhood and you're not collecting every single home, so the cost can skyrocket, and it can make it real challenging to try and figure out how much does it cost to run a truck to collect from your house, or from your house, or from your house. And what if one of you drop out, then all of a sudden the cost needs to go up significantly. And if somebody gets added in, it should drop down. But it can result in a number of different trucks running through the street instead of one truck, and then it puts a burden on other folks that are not recycling. So it really creates some challenges from an opt-in, opt-out perspective that we'll see which direction the city goes. One of the things that I love to share with folks is recycling is one of the most used city services, and as we're going through this process, if I had an ask for you all, it would be to contact your council folks and let them know what you would like to happen. Whether you fill the survey out or not, that information will be shared eventually. We do anticipate that most people like recycling. Nobody wants costs to increase. Nobody wants to pay more money. But I can assure you the material is getting recycled. It is creating jobs. It is generating tax dollars. It is the right way to handle trash. We do open up our facility for tours. So if you wanted to come and see what actually happens to your material, you can follow our truck. It's coming back to our facility. It's not going somewhere that it shouldn't be going. And we are processing this material, turning it back into new products. With that, I would love to open it up for questions. Happy to answer, and again, really appreciate the time.
Can you share with us any knowledge you know about Chesapeake's decision of what they've done? They
Want
have
me to bring mics out?
Oh,
Okay.
you know, Chesapeake decided, to stop curbside recycling.
I don't think it's on.
Well,
Push all the way.
Press it up.
No, push it all the way.
It's all the
There
way
you
up.
go.
Chesapeake has decided over a year ago to end their curbside recycling and go to, I guess, voluntary use of regional. Do you have any insights as to who the vendor is? Is it your company by chance? But what has been their experience with recycling now that they've ended curbside?
So the last full year that we had the contract going until probably May of 2022, we had over 14,000 tons of material that were collected, and the cost was a little over $4 million. Now there's about 3,000 tons being collected, and the cost is about $2.5 million for that service. It is requiring residents to drive to a drop-off location. There is another company that's doing the hauling, and where they're taking it, I'm not sure, and what's happening to it from there. It's not coming to TFC Recycling.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mike.
Do you have to turn it on every time?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Or, yeah. Just leave it on.
Hello?
Yeah, there you go.
I was just kind of curious. At Food Lion in my neighborhood, they have like 3 bins that you can drop off like plastic, from food bags and that sort of thing. Are you familiar with that, or what's your take on that?
So there is a company in Virginia that actually takes this low-density polyethylene, which is basically film. It could be anything from plastic bags to the wrapping over your dry cleaning that you have. And they'll take that and they'll turn it back into a piece of lumber. However, we encourage folks not to use plastic bags. We encourage folks to get reusable bags, and if given a choice, to choose paper versus plastic. I was at a meeting the other night where there were a few council folks that were sharing some information on recycling, and there are a lot of people that do not like plastic bags. And by that I mean the aquarium and plastic bags getting into our oceans. The Lynn Haber Ribbon Now group that finds them in stormwater and cleanup. TFC, they wrap in our equipment, they cause problems for us. You've got cotton farmers that don't like plastic bags. And I believe that there are 11 localities that are charging 5 cents if you want a plastic bag, which does not prevent you from getting the bag. It just generates some revenue, and some of these communities were using that revenue to support recycling and sustainability issues.
Well, actually, I have to point out something to you about these bags, because no matter how much we hate plastic, which I'm one of those people, I've not liked it for many, many years. They take the plastic bags of, like in food products, like you buy a big bag of chicken nuggets or something from Costco. If you rinse it out, you can put that in your recycling. I've been doing it for like well over a year. I just take a bag that I keep in the garage and then take it to the food line and just dump it in there. So, like it or not, plastic's here, unfortunately, to stay. So in that regard, would it be okay to use that? I mean, it seems like that's a good idea.
For sure. If you're having plastic bags and want to recycle them, recycling is the best way to handle it.
But you guys don't do it.
What happens from there, it does not go to TFC, and we just ask that you do not put it into your recycling cart.
Yeah.
Because plastic bags are one of the biggest challenges we have. And putting recyclable items into a plastic bag and then putting the bag into the cart, there's a extremely high probability that will not get recycled. So we want it in a container loose so it can be separated.
Getting back to the plastic bags, they changed the formula, I believe, of what they're made of, and that they're supposed to biodegrade. What I have a problem with is we use them. I'm a recycler, big recycler. But what happens is we use them to line our little trash cans in the home, and then so it means it's used twice. And what happens if we stop doing that, if they start charging us 5 cents or whatever it is a bag, we end up buying a roll of plastic bags to put in those trash cans. So you're getting the plastic anyway. So I'm just saying that if it degrades and it goes into the landfill, if it's still the formula they said where it degrades, then I don't see where there's an issue unless it takes centuries for it to degrade. But I'm saying if they actually made them with the material that's supposed to break down. Do you know anything about that?
I do know a little bit, and I see somebody in the crowd also, but let me share with you my limited knowledge, acknowledging that I have limited knowledge on this, but there was a push by the industry to make photodegradable and biodegradable with cornstarch in the plastic bags. And then what happened was when they started doing that, it became a challenge to recycle it, because if you're going to take these plastic bags and turn it into lumber for your decking or for park benches, and it's got photodegradable and biodegradable plastic in there, then all of a sudden it becomes a problem when the bench and the deck start to decompose due to the sunlight.
The landfill, it should just degrade so that it eliminates the cumulative problem. That's all.
Yeah, and so in regards to the cumulative problem, yes, so you might not have a bag, you might have a bag that breaks down. That can create a challenge also. There's something called PFAS, and what that is, it's chemicals, typically from the plastic industry, that are winding up in drinking water in our oceans and streams that are being ingested by fish that we are then eating. So if that plastic actually does decompose and does get into the storm water and does get into our oceans, it can create another challenge that they're just starting to measure right now. So there is no acceptable level. They're trying to establish, if there is one, on how much PFAS can be in our environment, and then they're going to go from there. So to me, the best alternative is don't take it in the first place, but I agree with you. People use them for trash can liners. People use them to pick up their dog droppings. Yep. So there absolutely is a use for it. If you have a use for it, great. If you're going to take these bags and wind up throwing them away, reusable is a better alternative.
And just to pivot off what she was saying, on Long Island in Suffolk County, they charge a nickel a bag, and that's for paper or plastic. That's any bag, which I don't understand that. You should be able to take paper for free. But anyway, when they first started that, after about 6 months, or I think it was a year, I saw a study that they had, is that the plastic in the landfills actually increased because people didn't have those bags to pick up dog poop and line their small trash cans with, so they had to buy them. Those bags are thicker than the ones you get in the grocery store, so they ended up with more plastic because the plastic bags were thicker, and everybody was still using those plastic bags. I don't know if they did a study after that, but initially the plastic had increased in the landfills because of that.
I'm not familiar with any study, but just philosophically, if you have to buy bags for dog droppings, you're probably only going to buy what you need, versus if you go to a supermarket or a big department store like a Walmart or a Target, they are giving these bags away like they're going out of style. They'll put one item in there and they'll give you more bags than you need.
Well, that was, like I said, that was the initial study. I don't know what happened since then. I haven't read anything yet, but initially that happened.
Okay, a question online from Martha. What is acceptable to put in the recycle cans in the beach at the resort? It is totally restricted to just bottles and cans? Is it totally restricted to just bottles and cans? We still do them at the beach, right? Have
Yes.
recycle cans there?
So along the ocean front, there were a number of containers for recycling that are typically targeted towards tourism. And at the beach, you're typically dealing with bottles and cans. And some of the recycling containers that we have the little round circular holes, so that we are trying to encourage people that do not take the time to read, that we're really just looking for the bottles and cans. If we made them so big that they look like a separate trash can, it could encourage wrong items to go in there. So we could accept the paper that was in there, because it all winds up going to the same place, but for the reasons I just mentioned, not a lot of people are reading and recycling at the beach. Paper.
I know I've watched a number of YouTubes on recycling, especially in Europe. But I think there's only two classes of plastic, though there's many codes for plastic. I believe it's correct that there's only two that are actually recyclable.
So in regards to the code, there are 7 codes, 1 through 7. They all have the recycling arrows on it. Number 1 is PET, polyethylene. Those are your water bottles and soda bottles, and yes, those are readily recyclable. There's also number 2, high-density polyethylene, and that comes in 2 separate forms. There's an injection molded, and there's a blow molded. And the blow molded is like a balloon, and that might be your laundry detergent containers and your bleach containers. You might actually see a seam going down the side. The injection molded are your butter tubs. That has a nipple on the bottom, and again, not TFC, but the folks that we sell to say, we want the bottles to make new bottles, and even though this butter tub might be labeled a number 2, it's not the plastic we want back, and so we can't tell people all number 2s. We have to tell people number 1 and number 2 plastic bottles are really what we're targeting. Number 5 is polypropylene, and there is a market for that. Yogurt containers. However, that rigid plastic, it's not a lot of volume, and the value of that polypropylene does not justify the investment. So if we were to include more items, it would raise the cost even more from a recycling perspective to the resident. So it's one of those, do we want to try and recycle more and pay a little more? Do we want to recycle a little bit less and pay a little less? Another example is glass. After we collect glass, it all gets mixed together, it all gets separated out by size. So in with this pile of this shredded 2-inch minus, as we refer to it, there are golf balls, batteries, coins, shredded paper. And then we use what we refer to as an air knife, which is basically this air blowing as it falls, blowing all the light fractions out, all the small pieces of glass, all the paper, things that are light. And then we have a pile that remains that's about 80% glass that we're then able to pay to get rid of after we've collected and incurred all this cost. And then that company will then separate it out with optical sorting units into 3 different colors, clear, brown, and amber. I'm sorry, clear, green, and amber glass. And then it can be turned back into new bottles.
2 last questions. What percentage of what you collect at the curb is recyclable? In other words, the stuff that's contaminated, how much is contaminated? And of the part that is recyclable, how much of that, what percentage of that do you have to pay to get rid of? And what part of that stream actually generates a profit?
Okay, great question. So there's two different terms here that I like to use, and one is when people are throwing stuff into the container, what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. So on the non-acceptable items that go into the bin, and then what we actually process and get rid of, it's actually over 40% of the material. So that could be stuff that's in recyclables in plastic bags, anything that goes through our process that's small. So we do have the glass that is recycled, but we have some other stuff that's not. But it's over 40% of that material. So we absolutely can do a better job, and education and outreach is the key. When Virginia Beach put the carts in back in the late 1990s, they actually have on the cart in the center in raised lettering what is and what is not acceptable. But it doesn't jump out at you and kind of hit you right in the face with colors and everything, because the technology wasn't available at that time. We do believe that there is efforts that will continue to happen to try and get education and outreach, including onto the cart with some type of a label that says paper bottles and cans, gives you pictures. Spanish too, for our folks that may not understand, and then also the items that we do not want into the bin. So it's a constant education and outreach, and one of the things that we're fighting are manufacturers that want to greenwash their message to make people believe that the product that they're creating is environmentally friendly and it can be recycled. This was everything from Keurig cups that were promoted as being recycled because up in Canada they were recycling them, and there was a class action lawsuit. This includes Glad that makes bags, and they said these are recycling bags. Throw all your recycling in these bags and then put your bag into the recycling cart. They were sued in addition to Walmart in a class action suit. So there are a lot of folks, and the plastic industry is, in my opinion, real challenging to deal with because of their lobbying efforts and the fact that they have on every single bottle and piece of plastic that's sold to consumers in the U.S. a 1 through 7, the recycling arrows, and we would love to take it all back, and we'd love to mix it all together, but the folks we sell to are not taking it back from us. So what do you want that you will pay us for? The number 1s and number 2 bottles are really what we're targeting, which is about 95% of all bottles are number 1 and number 2. So it's an easier message to say plastic bottles are recyclable versus plastic 1s and 2s and asking people to look for a number underneath.
What is recyclable? How much what percentage is a profit, and what percentage do you have to pay to get rid of?
So out of the products that we collect, glass is the only item that we collect right now where we actually have to pay to get rid of it. There was a period of time when markets go up and down and China was not buying cardboard and mixed paper, and after we collected and processed it, we actually had to pay to get rid of it to keep it out of the landfill. But in general, paper, plastics, metals, all good, valuable and viable options from a recycling perspective.
And what was your percentage of waste?
It was over 40% of the material that we have right now going into the carts is winding up being processed and then winding up going to waste to energy or in the future perhaps landfill.
Thank you very much.
That might explain why some states, like in Montana, they don't do glass. They don't let you recycle glass because of the cost that's associated, probably.
Will you take that out of the contract if it gets renewed?
So in regards to glass, there are different things that other communities are doing. Some of them are going to drop-offs, so you can actually bring glass if you wanted to recycle it. It's no longer collected at the curb. You can then separate it out by color into a container, which makes it a cleaner stream, which does increase the value. It does make it more expensive from a cost perspective, and it's less convenient than the curbside program, but there are those type of programs.
It's more expensive to the homeowner or to the city? I mean,
it would be to the city because you actually have these containers that are separated out, and then you would have to send a separate truck to pick that material up, then bring it back to a location. So it's less convenient for residents to have to drive it to a drop-off center, but it does make the process a lot cleaner stream, and it could generate a few dollars. So right now, the stuff we're generating from a glass perspective, it's contaminated, so it's less valuable.
Is there, are there any communities that have like frequent drop-off locations, you know, to keep the cost down, like instead of, you know, using the trucks to go into the neighborhood?